This is the Brandon T. Adams audio experience. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Brandon T. Adams audio experience. I'm Brandon T. Adams, and I'm sitting here with Dr. David Yerkes, who, first off, thank you for being here. This is going to be an exciting day. You are my longevity doctor, so listeners are gonna get to actually hear inside what you've been doing with me. And how we met, just guys, give you a little preface. We met at a Bradley event. I was speaking on stage, and it was me, Jeff Hoffman, Bradley, met you. We stayed in contact for what, 3 years, 2 years?
I think it was about 3 years.
Via text, back and forth. You came to Rise and Record 2023, and then we ended up working together, worked with you on the brand side of things, and I hired you. You're working with me on my longevity and really just trying to optimize my performance, which we'll jump into. But I want to start with you becoming a doctor. And what was the inspiration like one day to say, hey, I want to be a doctor? What was your drive behind becoming a doctor?
Well, it was kind of a process, actually. So I didn't know any physicians or anybody like that growing up. Grew up in a blue-collar family. I liked science and math, and I like people, and I like health.
Yeah.
I've always been interested in health in general. So like I was telling you before, when I was 8 years old, I convinced my mom to take me to Weight Watchers with her just because it was interesting.
Yeah.
So it's something that I was reading health literature when I was a young man. And so it's something that was interesting to me, but I didn't necessarily know I wanted to be a doctor. I didn't even know if I could, because I didn't have any of that frame of reference. So when it was time to go to college, my mom and dad encouraged us to go to college and get an education. So it was time to go to college. I had to pick something. And so I decided to do pre-med, and it sounded like a good career, and everything like that. So I just started taking, those steps, and it worked out. So as I pursued it further, it became clearer and clearer that was probably the path I needed to be on, and I was successful in doing that. And so here we are.
So what would be, because I think of business, you have obstacles, you have failures. When you first started working in different hospitals, what were a couple, let's say, I don't call failures, but life lessons you learned while out working with people as a doctor?
Well, one of the best lessons I've learned as my whole journey in medicine was about failure. And that might sound kind of crazy, but when you go through medical school, you almost become a professional student. Yeah. And so one of the things I learned after taking test after test and quiz after quiz and practice test and all these things, one of the things I noticed was that I learned better from missing a question and then reading figuring out, okay, what did I miss? What was wrong there? Than I did from all the studying I was doing. It really stuck with me when I would miss something or miss a question and then go back and review that. So that, I think, was kind of and that lesson is really, really applicable to a lot of different areas of life. And entrepreneurship is a huge one, right? So I think I was thinking about this the other day, actually. That was probably one of the biggest, has nothing to do with medicine specifically, but just I may have learned this and not realized it when I was younger as an athlete. And I was talking to some of the guys about this earlier, but you learn when you're an athlete, you learn when you're in sports, just to kind of overcome failure, to keep going, to keep pursuing, and just take the next shot and stay, grit, I guess, and stay persistent and tenacious. And so I think maybe I learned that from as a young man. And then when I saw, as my studies progressed, I saw that I was learning more from when I would miss a question, especially during practice tests. That really stuck with me. So I think that was probably the most valuable lesson I learned from that, as far as that goes. But just
what about an experience with a patient? You obviously not say the name or whatnot, but something that challenged you to think differently of how you approach a human on anything that they're going through.
Yeah. So I had a lot of those experiences, and I think there was kind of a accumulation of experiences throughout my career as a hospital medicine doc. When I finished all my residency and all my training, I ended up doing hospital medicine. So we're seeing very sick people that are hospitalized for acute illnesses, but a lot of times these are the end result of many years of chronic illness. And then those people are oftentimes in poor health generally, but we see a lot of the same things over and over again. And a lot of this stuff is ultimately the end result of poor health in general.
So what would be 4 things? I know you talk about this. Poor health. What are like 4 core things that most people have that are why their health is poor?
So there are kind of the 4 main killers of longevity, and then there's 4 things that we can do that I really focus on that you can do to kind of prevent those things. And let's
think of the 4. Let's start 4 main killers of longevity of why people don't live longer, why they're not healthier.
So there's metabolic disease and insulin resistance. There's cancer, and which is a big one. Atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and then dementia, which a lot of those are very related. They're intertwined because each one of them kind of affects the other in some way. One of probably one of the biggest ones that really has downstream effects on the others is metabolic disease. And so that's where we have a lot of control. Not everybody does, but a lot of us have some control over our metabolic health. And so that's one of the places that we focus on helping people prevent a lot of these things that we see the majority of Americans suffering from towards the end of their life. And it's not like, when you're in your 80s and 90s only. These are people that are, should be in good health.
So what do you mean by that? Somebody very general, metabolic health. What does that mean?
So insulin resistance, which is like pre-diabetes, but a lot of times insulin resistance doesn't show up until way down the road. We're not able to really detect that unless you do kind of specialized testing. So insulin resistance, poor cardiovascular health. So if you're basically out of shape is the kind of the general way to say that. But all those things, high blood cholesterol, which again we can use different terms to describe that. But essentially, when you're at risk for cardiovascular disease because your lipids are out of whack.
Is it based on the food that you eat, your diet?
So it can be. It's more really based on your caloric intake than just like, say, we used to think eating eggs. Eggs have high cholesterol, so avoid eggs, and that's going to raise your. No, that's actually not that true. Most of our dietary cholesterol doesn't affect our actual lipid panel that much. What really affects it is our metabolic health. So it's a combination of all these different factors: our sleep, our weight, our exercise routine, our mental health, and our stress management. All those things play a role into our metabolic health because it ultimately comes down to the health of the cell. So what you're looking at is we have billions of cells in our body. So what we're trying to do is like look at that cell as almost like an individual organism and almost like a factory. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at the machinery and all the operations that are going on in that cell, and we're trying to basically make that work properly. And so if you can do that, then essentially that has downstream effects on the organism because we are essentially just the building blocks of what we're made of, right? Yeah. And so if we can I sometimes compare it to a building. If you're building a building out of bricks that are not well made, you're going to have a weak building. So we want those building blocks to be as strong and healthy as possible.
I have so many questions now I'm going to target into. So first one is the food. So what would be, because there's a lot of, like every day I swear somebody says, oh, this is good for you. This is bad for you. This is good for you. What would be, let's first talk about the foods that are ultimately really good for you, whether it's specific foods, it could be steak, whatever, chicken. What are really good foods for you for health-wise?
So I'm a big believer in, for most people, as an omnivore because we get a lot of good protein from meat.
Yeah.
But also plants have a lot of good polyphenols and nutrients, micronutrients, especially fiber is really, really important for us. So instead of focusing on specific foods, like eat this food, if I had to pick one, it would be olive oil, extra virgin olive oil that's, locally sourced.
Wait, that's good for you?
That's good for you. Yeah. So olive oil is one of the things that I try to get in my diet. I love blueberries. If there's a superfood, I don't really care for that, but I love blueberries. They have a lot of but there's so many different foods, like individual specific foods that have different, mushrooms is another one.
Yeah.
There's so many different foods, individual foods that have their own individual benefits. It's hard to say a specific food that is necessarily good for you or bad for you. But what I try to do is I try to focus on principles. And, those principles for nutrition specifically are, maintain a caloric balance. So depending on what your goals are. So if you have a good body composition, your goals are to just maintain your body composition, as in your fat composition, then, you want to be at a maintenance calories or in a slight deficit, meaning eat a little bit fewer calories than what your body needs. And if that is probably one of the most impactful things on our health from a nutrition standpoint is really just our caloric intake. Now, the quality of the food absolutely matters. So I definitely recommend focusing on what we call single ingredient foods. So the more minimally processed it can be, the better it typically is for you.
Kind of like eating like a caveman. So I'm eating the food I shoot, kill, the steak, the chicken, off the ground, off the land.
Yes.
Now I want to go into like misconceptions, myths.
Okay.
There's a lot of things on you look at commercials, everything. Oh, this is good for you. It's got vitamin D. What are some that come to mind that claim to actually be good for you, but actually aren't good for you?
Well, I think probably
For
one
foods.
of the, so a lot of the stuff that you see in the grocery store, so the marketing folks have done a brilliant job with labels and marketing and things like that. I think one of the probably ones that comes to mind is just granola bars. They're packed, if you look at just a generic granola bar, it's probably got, and again, it's the calories. It's got a high calorie content. It's got a high fat content. It's sugary. It doesn't have that much protein in it. But again, you're looking at how much calories does it have? How many calories does it have? How much protein does it have? And kind of looking at that balance. I don't get into kind of nitpicking all the ingredients like some people do. If you focus on the caloric value for something that you're getting and how satiating is that going to be? So satiating means, is it going to make you full, or are you going to just basically feel like you ate air? And so that is one of the big things. So if I was just going to go through the grocery store and look, down the grocery aisle.
I want to know specifics for people.
So things like cereal or granola bars and those kind of things that could be labeled as healthy or people think
cereal.
it's healthy.
I used to love cereal, but really, is cereal like a Cheerios or anything? Is it really even good for you?
Again, it's all relative. So it's all in how much. If you're eating that is your main source of calories, that's probably not going to yield a healthy outcome. If you want to I love cereal. It's like my vice, if you will. And I will have some cereal every once in a while, but I limit it. My favorite cereal is Cinnamon Life. Or
Fruity Pebbles.
Oh, okay.
With sugar on top.
Yeah. Ooh. So that
Chex Mix with sugar on top.
So
the Chex thing, a lot of milk.
I used to eat when I was younger.
Cocoa Puffs.
See, I never got into Cocoa Puffs, but Cocoa Puffs I've heard, and then the milk turns into chocolate milk. Yeah. I used to sprinkle sugar, like a layer of sugar on top of my cereal when I was younger.
What about the talk on, there's so many perspectives in this. What about the talk of milk? Milk from a cow. Is that good for you? The chemicals,
So, first of all, there's a fair amount of people that do have some lactose intolerance. So lactose is it's a molecule in milk. It's a sugar molecule in milk that a lot of folks are intolerant to. So that can cause some problems.
I have some friends where they can't have anything with that.
Yes. But in general, if you look at the human data, there's a lot of theories about, this has this in it or this has that in it. I don't know of any human data that shows, poor outcomes for people that drink milk compared to people that don't. So now I will say there's a movement now with the raw milk where they're basically not getting it pasteurized. That's, in my opinion, dangerous because you now are putting yourself at risk for pretty serious infections. And so to me, milk is an individual choice. And there may be people out there that we'll say that could eliminate milk and and feel better or something like that. So, but as far as like large studies or anything like that with milk, I'm not aware of
I do
that.
almond milk.
Yeah.
So like I'm almond milk. I used to drink milk like it was nothing. And so I want to go into, we're going to talk about, and I'm very open book. We'll talk about the work you're doing with me, but I want to go into your 4 core like tips on how somebody can live longer. So longevity. Go through your process of how somebody watching, listening, puts another extra 10, 15, 20 years in life. Obviously you can't 100% calculate that, but what are the things you can do to live longer?
So this is something everybody can do, and this is what I like about this, because there are a lot of things that you can spend $1 million a year and kind of get that extra 5% or whatever.
Like that one guy I just seen that's trying to live to like 150 and he's spending $6 million a year.
Exactly. But you don't have to do that. Yeah. So most people, this is something like everybody can do pretty much. And those 4 principles that I call the core 4, but it's not, there are other people that have talked about these things. So the number one thing, which I believe is the foundation of health, is sleep. Getting good sleep quality and sleep quantity. And for entrepreneurs,
still working on it.
I know.
We've been working on it.
It's hard when you're busy, right? So sleep quality and sleep quantity and sleep timing are all very critically important to not just your health, but to your performance. And sleep is one of those things that I think is a low-hanging fruit when it comes to performance, because it's something that we can fix quickly and you can see almost immediate results. Whereas some of these other things might take longer to show up, as far as like, say, cardiovascular fitness. It takes a lot more work to get that outcome than it does fixing your sleep.
What is how much minimum should people get for sleep?
I would say 7 hours. Most of the data is consistent with 7 hours of sleep. Now, one thing, a misperception there is that's not 7 hours in bed. That's 7 hours of sleep. Yeah. Right. So I actually use a sleep tracker ring, an Oura ring, and I don't have any affiliation with them, but other than just being a customer. So, but I like that because it tells me the quality of my sleep. It actually tells me my real sleep duration, not just my time in bed. And it also measures other parameters like heart rate variability and some of those
REM
things.
cycles.
Yes.
You and I have been talking about this, and this is one thing I've been really working on, which is a challenge. And I told you I'm challenging the 7 hours. Like for me, 6.5 is what I ultimately want to get. But even the past 3 nights, I've got 5 hours. Mm-hmm. So it's like the obstacle I have, and again, most entrepreneurs listening, is when you're traveling. So I'm in East Coast time. I'll be in Central in a couple days. I might be in Pacific time in another time frame. And so it's constantly changing that, but also my schedule. Like if I got an event, I got meetings. Like last night we were up together. We met with Kevin and some people. We were up till midnight, 12:30. And so then I wake up at 5:30. And so one thing you said is try to go to bed and wake up at the same time.
Yes.
My ultimate time is go to bed by 9:30, which is the more challenging side for me, to go to bed that early, and then wake up at 4. That's what I used to do 5:30, then I could put to 5, then put to 4:30, and now I put it to 4. And so what is that? 6.5 hours is what I'm trying to get. So I am pushing the envelope. But that's been the biggest challenge for me, as you know, as we work together, is because I do have so many things, but I do realize I need to sleep.
Yes.
I used to do the 4 hours a night. That does not work.
That's not going to work. And that's going to be not just detrimental to your health, but that's going to be detrimental to your performance. Even your interactions are going to be impacted. So your ability to receive and give information in a way that's productive is going to be affected by your lack of sleep. Your ability to form memories, your creativity, all of those things are going to be negatively impacted by that lack of sleep. So you're going to be basically spinning your wheels and be less productive during the day. If you took that extra hour, you would get done in less time what you would be trying to get done in all that extra time that you're trying to spend. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, the challenge I have is, like, last night, we obviously, we're out, we're meeting people, we had dinner, late dinner, everything. I go to bed by 12:30, whatever it is. And normally I'd wake up at 4. Well, that wasn't gonna work. So I woke up at 5:30. And I will say, when I woke up, I was fucking tired. I did not want to, and all the things, like, but I had to get up because I had a schedule. So usually by 9 a.m., I have a sequence of things I have to do no matter what. But because I have so many other things going on, I have to get up, because if I don't get up, I'm going to be behind, because I had to send an agreement out. I had to make 3 calls. I had to send these emails. I had to delegate these things. So, and then I had a non-negotiable is I had to exercise. Right. It was only 15 minutes this morning, but it was 15 minutes. So, like, that's my mindset. I'm looking at it, where I realize I have to do certain things before a certain time. And sometimes sleep is the sacrifice, which I don't want it to be, but it's the reality of it.
Sleep is often the sacrificial lamb. So there's some things you can do. There's a few different ways you can approach this. And I recommend kind of hitting as many of these as possible. The more of these you hit, the better off you're going to be. So the first one is how often you do it, right? So if you're doing this on a regular basis, it's going to be way more impactful than a one-off here and there, right? So we were traveling. It was kind of a special moment. So we were out later than normal, right? And so that was a little bit of a one-off experience. So that's the first thing.
Problem is that happens to me every week. Right.
So at that point, then you have to start thinking, okay, do I need to be more disciplined about saying, about having a boundary there about a bedtime? Not necessarily a bedtime, but setting boundaries with yourself and maybe even others of saying, hey, this is important to me. This is vitally important to my health and my performance. I've got a big day. I've got work to do tomorrow, and I have these non-negotiables in the morning. That means I have to have a non-negotiable at night too. So
one thing before we go to 2 of 4 is, we talked about this, and this is an interesting one. It's alcohol. So you and I talked about this. We agreed that there's nothing about alcohol that's actually good for you.
Not that we have ever seen.
Anything. Yeah. And so I try to tell myself, I mean, alcohol does make you think in different ways, which sometimes leads to that productivity, but really alcohol is not good for you. And sleep-wise, it messes with your sleep.
Big time.
And so for me, and I go to, let's say this week, I always like talking in real time. This week, I've not drinking any alcohol. I've had non-alcoholic beer. So I taste just like a beer, because I like beer.
It was really good. We had some last
night. But 0 the bad effect. And I could drive, all these different things. So I've been forcing myself to figure out, how can I still get that feeling of feeling fit in, community, having a beer without having the negative side effect. But then there is times I drink. And my wife stopped drinking 9 months ago, and it's completely changed, like, everything. And she's just healthier, happier, and all these things. For me, I still choose to drink, but you want to share the perspective you've told me on for mental health too.
Absolutely.
Again, everybody's different, but
so another thing, if you kind of, like I said, hit different factors with kind of what you were talking about with kind of going to bed late and getting up early. One of the other, if you want to toss, gasoline on the fire of poor performance and poor health, add alcohol to staying up late, and that will really wreck your...
It just accelerates the feeling of shit.
Exactly, yes. So again, that comes down to having boundaries with yourself, and that's not an overnight thing sometimes. Some people can just say, I'm deciding to do this, and change it like your wife did. Some people, it takes a little bit more, work, and mental modeling. But ultimately, changing... So alcohol, first of all, significantly, it's a neurotoxin. It significantly impacts your sleep, again, which I'm not a sleep doctor, but sleep is, again, the foundation, what I believe is the foundation of everything else in the core 4. And so the other thing is, you mentioned mental health. So alcohol impacts your REM sleep, and REM sleep is our kind of natural antidepressant. It's our natural it's where our minds kind of remove the emotion from our experience to the point where we can process memories, and we can maybe recover from experiences that are hard And every day we are supposed to have REM sleep. When you don't get REM sleep, there's actually a study that I think is fascinating. People that had less REM sleep were less able to actually read people's emotions. So they had less empathy, and they were less able to read people's emotions on their face. So if you're in sales, if you're in leadership, if you're in any of those things, it also makes you more irritable if you don't get enough REM sleep. So that's the reason most of our REM is stacked at the end of the night. So if you're cutting your sleep short, a big part of what you're losing is REM sleep. And so, you can be more irritable, like I said, less empathetic. It can affect your relationships. It can affect your leadership. It can affect so many different things if you're not getting that REM sleep, because it's our emotional regulation that is affected.
So let's give the perspective, because there's some people I believe should not, like, drinking is really bad. I just had Trey on the podcast, Trey Easley, mutual friends here, and we talked he's now 4 years sober, which is amazing.
Yes.
And he realized that alcohol is allergic reaction. And for him, he can't drink.
Right.
And so for me, here's a part of drinking that I enjoy. It's a community social side. Like this weekend, it's Memorial Weekend coming up. I'm going to go see camping, and I'm going to be with my father-in-law, and we'll sit on the porch, and we'll have a Busch Light, which is my go-to, Busch Light. And so I'll have a couple Busch Light. Now, yes, alcohol's bad, but I look at moderation. Can you share for the listeners, for people that feel, me drinking, I feel so bad, because some people may have a beer here and there, or I like old-fashioned or margarita. Can you share the perspective you shared with me on how you believe in moderation in some cases, or how it's proven, like, feeling community-wise?
Yes.
Share that perspective.
So having said everything we just said about alcohol.
Yeah, knowing that it's not fucking good for you.
I'm not saying everybody has to be a teetotaler, right? Because there are, you mentioned some social situations, especially say on a weekend, if you don't have a big, day the next day, and you're in a situation where, it is something that you genuinely get enjoyment out of, and you're not overdoing it. You're not getting, so intoxicated that that's even more harmful. So I believe, there's a benefit to social connections, and there's a value there, right? And there's a value to quality of life. And because we're human beings, and alcohol has been associated with social interactions since we've existed pretty much. It is part of it. And unless you're if you're somebody like Trey, who, if you drink, bad things happen, you should not drink at all. But if you're not that person, and you can drink in moderation, you can have one or two drinks and have
on occasion,
and have a nice time. I do that myself.
Yeah.
So is there a physiologic benefit to that? No, there's not. Is there a quality of life benefit to that? Sure, there is. And a big part of longevity, I'm a longevity doctor, but a big part of longevity is quality of life. That's really most of it, right? And so, yes, quality of life has to do with, your functionality and avoiding dementia and avoiding frailty and all these things, but it also has to do with enjoying life. And so if you can do that in moderation, then I think you don't have to be a teetotaler.
Yeah.
I think that it actually has value.
Okay, so, and by the way, listening, don't try to justify going out and having a 12-pack of beer tonight and saying, hey, social connection. That was me in college, sadly. I drank way too much.
Yes.
And I actually sold alcohol.
I would say this. If your social connection is over-consuming,
it's not good.
That is not good. You probably need to have a different association with alcohol.
Yes.
So that, I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, next step. So we talked about sleep. We're talking about alcohol. What are the going into the 4 core? What's the next one?
So sleep is obviously the baseline. Then physical movement. So there's
my favorite one.
Yes. So nutrition and physical movement, or you could put, they're not necessarily in any particular order, but we'll say physical movement. There's 4. I kind of classify that into like 4 categories. So there's cardiovascular exercise, there's resistance training, there's mobility, and then there's non-exercise activity, okay? And those all have individual benefits on their own for longevity and health span, what we call health span, which is how long you live well. So those are kind of the 4 areas of exercise that you should be trying to basically intentionally approaching individually with a plan of how am I going to improve my muscular strength and muscle mass. Muscle mass is actually shown to decrease mortality from cancer. So the higher your muscle mass is, the lower your mortality is from cancer. And I have a lot of theories on that. It has to do with cachexia and cancer and all that stuff. But a lot of it has to do with just your functionality and your mobility. So number 2 is cardiovascular exercise. If you could take the benefits of cardiovascular exercise and put them in a pill, it'd be worth $1 million a pill. I mean, that's how powerful that is for your body. Again, lowers your risk of cancer, lowers your risk of actually getting cancer, and multiple other, obviously, atherosclerotic disease, which is heart attacks and strokes and things like that. So cardiovascular exercise, just to put it in perspective, I'm going to kind of summarize the data here, but ultimately smoking increases our risk of death by about 2-fold. So it doubles our risk of death, basically. Having a very high, extremely high VO2 max decreases your risk of death by about 5 times compared to a very low VO2 max. When you mean by that,
what does that mean,
VO2 max? VO2 max is just a way that we measure cardiovascular fitness. It's how much oxygen
like how in shape we are almost.
Yes, how in shape you are. How much the definition is how much oxygen, what's the highest amount of oxygen your muscles can use at maximum output. But what it really is measuring is what is your cardiovascular fitness, cardiovascular and muscular fitness. And so we can train that. We can specifically train to improve that through different types of cardiovascular.
And again, these are like going for a run, a jog,
yes.
Could be doing a walk,
yes.
Going to the gym, anything that is a physical activity that gets our heart going and breathing.
So any movement, aside from any increase in movement and activity is going to improve that. But there are ways, but as you improve it, you're going to plateau unless you become intentional about training to improve it. Does that make sense? So like if I'm just going out and running willy-nilly and just kind of doing whatever and not intentionally training, then I'm not going to have as much benefit as if I was training intentionally with a specific type of, say, zone 2, if we're doing 80% zone 2 and 20% HIIT training and that kind of thing. So you're going to get more benefit if you're training it intentionally, because just like anything else, if you're intentional about it and you follow a plan that actually has been proven to help a certain thing, then you're going to have better outcomes.
Basically, do some kind of exercise. So you'll live a lot longer.
Cardiovascular exercise, number 2. Number 3 for movement is mobility, which a lot of people don't think about, but especially as we age, we lose our mobility. We're hypermobile as children, and then as we age, we sit a lot and we lose our mobility. Even fit people a lot of times lose their mobility, but mobility is a big thing that can help us prevent injury. So joint mobility specifically, and preventing injury is it's my number 2 goal for exercise. My number 1 goal is to get more fit. My number 2 goal is to prevent injury, because injury is devastating, as we've talked about.
I had my shoulder recently.
Yeah, and that was kind of a slight injury, but it was really impactful for you, especially psychologically and everything. Yeah. So preventing injury is really important. Mobility, focusing on your mobility in a preventive mode is really important. Most people wait.
Define that. When you mean is it stretching?
Yeah, basically joint mobility. So stretching, but it's not just static stretching. So there are things you can do that improve your mobility. Even types of things like yoga can improve your joint mobility and everything like that. And that, if your joints have more range of motion, if you will, then when you do have that moment where you stumble or the other thing is just quality of life, getting in and out of a vehicle or those kind of things too. Those also have to do with mobility. But over time, we start to lose more and more of that, and we become less functional, and then we become more prone to injury. So stretching is a big part of that, obviously. But there's other ways, passive or active range of motion. So we can even do that as we're as we're doing resistance training or other types of exercise, we can combine it with something like yoga or Pilates. So those are there's a lot you can get into with mobility. But
what's the fourth one?
So 4 is non-exercise activity. And this is really important for longevity, but also for body composition, because we've noticed that as the more people move around during the day, and what I'm doing with my hands right now, that's non-exercise activity. Walking around the house, that's non-exercise activity. Some people put walking in the category of exercise. Some people put it in the category of non-exercise activity. It's kind of hard to separate depending on how you define exercise and all that stuff. But that doesn't really matter that much. What matters is that you're moving, and that you're moving constantly throughout the day. The more hours a day that you spend sitting down, basically the higher risk you are for bad health outcomes. They even did a study where they had people exercise in the morning and then continue to move throughout the day, and then they had people exercise in the morning and then sit throughout the day. And the people that sat throughout the day, they didn't negate the benefits of exercise, but they didn't retain the benefits of exercise like the people that continued to move. So non-exercise activity, strongly associated with longevity. A lot of people use step counts because it's just basically a way to quantify that. So, 7 to 10,000 steps a day is kind of what we use. And if you look at the graph, and people will nitpick that, but basically 7 to 10,000 steps a day has been associated with improved longevity. Then it kind of starts to plateau after that. But ultimately, that is just a way, it's not a magic thing. It's just a way to quantify how much are you moving? How much are you moving around during the day?
Okay, so I hired you. Mm-hmm. You hired our company, Accelerant Media Group, to work with your brand, messaging, and content and everything. But then I saw everything and I said, David, I am really interested in how to perform, because I'm somewhat healthy, I feel. Mm-hmm. I exercise almost every day. I do watch what I eat. I do some fasting. I'm trying different things. But I want you to walk through what we've done. And I'm very open book. Everybody can hear about my life. The process, so I hired you. Walk through what we've done from the start and what we're doing now for my own health to improve, to live longer.
Sure, and I think this is a good segue into nutrition, because one of the things that we do is obviously we talk about how to train. We haven't even gotten all the way into doing all that, but one of the first things we do is do an extensive nutritional panel, and we can look at your nutrient status. Mm-hmm. So we do metabolomics, which it's kind of, you can kind of geek out on that a little bit, but it's basically looking at the cellular health, the health of the cell, and from a nutritional standpoint, as well as, we look at some toxins, and we look at your protein levels. And then, but the big part of that is kind of looking at your nutrient levels. We also look at methylation. So all of those things kind of combine with it from looking at you from a nutritional standpoint. Now, I separate nutrition into kind of two things. That we have some known principles, and then we have a lot of individual variation. And so we talk about known principles, which is, get your protein, get your fiber, that kind of, get your hydration, that kind of stuff. But then we look at the individual approach, and that's where all the testing comes in. Yeah. So we can take a whole look at your nutritional panel and say, okay, here's some things, because even as healthy as you are, you still had some deficiencies and things you needed to work on. So explain that.
So I went in, I had swab tests, I had urine, I went in blood tests, all these different tests.
So the swab was for ApoE4.
Yep.
So ApoE is a gene that encodes a lipoprotein that carries a risk for Alzheimer's. So different genetic profiles on that carry different genetic risks. So we checked you for that, obviously, to see if we needed to do how aggressive we need to be for certain things. So that was what the swab was for. We're also going to be doing some more genetic testing, and some things like that. But the blood test, so we did several different blood panels, right? We did the nutritional panel, which is 125 different biomarkers. And then we did some of the more traditional things. We did a blood count. We did a metabolic panel, like a basic metabolic panel. So we looked at your liver and your kidneys and all that stuff. We checked your testosterone. We checked your lipid panel. So not just a lipid panel, we checked LP little a. LP little a is a one-time test that we need to know, okay, is it really high? If it is, this is really only influenced by genetic factors. So that way we know what your risk profile is and we can know how to attack that. We checked your ApoB, which is, again, kind of like a proxy for LDL. It's probably a better measurement of your overall risk for laying down plaque in your arteries. Plaque is what builds up in your arteries and causes you to have heart attacks and strokes. So high ApoB, high plaque, high risk of heart attacks and strokes.
So share with them the results. My results.
So your results were fantastic, actually.
I think you said the best you've seen.
Yeah. So I mean, I can't remember the last time I saw a male with an HDL of 60 or more. And so that's HDL, for everybody watching, is your good cholesterol.
Yeah.
It's significantly impacted by genetics, but also by your lifestyle. So how you eat, you exercise a lot. One of your non-negotiables is exercising every day.
Yeah.
So significantly impacted by that. HDL function is actually probably more important than HDL level. Like, we can artificially, what we found out, we used to give people things to elevate the HDL. We found out it didn't make a bunch of difference. So what we think is HDL function is probably more impactful on our health. But if you have a naturally high HDL, it's probably functioning appropriately. So anyways, your lipid panel was fantastic. I was very, very pleased with your lipid panel. Your risk is very low.
My testosterone was high, too.
Your testosterone was high. Yep.
Yeah.
So that was good. And I'm trying to think one of the things that we tested was vitamin D. And your
I'm lacking in vitamin D.
Yes. So your vitamin D was low normal. So according to the laboratory reference range, it was still in the normal range, but it was in the 30s. It was in the low 30s. And so I like for people to be a little closer to 50 to 60 for things like particularly immune health. And so vitamin D, and I've got a whole thing I've got to send you on vitamin D, but it functions, it's a hormone-like molecule, it's a cell signaling molecule, it impacts your immunity. A lot of people think of vitamin D as when it comes to calcium homeostasis or controlling your calcium levels in your body, which it is important for that, but it has a lot of other functions in the body. So vitamin D is probably one of the most important things that we measure, and for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of people don't have enough, and two, it's a very important molecule for our health. So it's easy. So instead of just supplementing vitamin D, without really knowing where you're at, we supplement to a level. I would like to supplement until we get to a certain level. Now, the other thing is you can get vitamin D from going outside and getting sunlight. That's how our bodies make it. And then you can get vitamin D from actual food sources too. So, so there's other ways to get it, but other than supplementing. But it looks like supplementing is kind of the quick way to do that.
And one of the things I used to take way back in the day, now I start taking again, was creatine.
Yes.
Can you talk about the power of creatine, what it does for the body?
I love creatine. It's a very so basically creatine is a cellular energy holder. So ATP is our cellular energy molecule. It is what makes it's our gasoline of our bodies, of our cells. And creatine kind of stores that. So in the cell, the more creatine you have in the cell, the more ATP you have readily available for those cellular functions. And now, that's all mechanistic theory. There's a lot of things that have mechanistic theory behind them that don't pan out in the human studies. But it looks like in human studies, there's actually outcomes. There's improved performance, improved muscular performance. But now we're seeing evidence for cognitive performance, for depression, like preventing depression, and even preventing dementia and cognitive decline. So cognitive performance is a big thing that I think is a huge benefit for creatine, but muscular strength and muscular performance as well. So, I mean, it's killing our two most important, our brain and our muscles, two are our most important, longevity vehicles. So it is doing well for us.
So to sum up for people listening, we started by evaluating, doing tests, looking at where do I need to improve, what are my goals, and what I've fixed is I'm working on my sleeping and never like really looking to master my sleep. Doing creatine, I'm my exercise. I'm looking at what things I need to supplement more. So it starts with anybody that would hire you looking through doing these tests and saying, okay, here's where you're at, here's where we need to improve, and then putting the plan in place. And that's really what you do.
Yes. So I kind of look at it as like a retirement portfolio almost. So your longevity is like preparing for retirement. And you wouldn't prepare your retirement financial portfolio without having ever had any feedback, without ever looking at your numbers or anything like that. That would be silly, right? So without ever making any changes, most people wouldn't do that, right? So that's how I look at it. We're doing the testing. We're finding out where you're at. We're also testing. We're going to be doing we're going to test your VO2 max. We're going to give you a plan in place for that.
Yeah.
So we're doing all these things to test, not just to test for fun. We're doing it so we can see where you're at, what you need to fix, and put a actual plan in place to get you where you need to be.
So I could talk about this all day. I do want to, before we go, I do want to touch on one other thing that's very interesting. So you have served in Afghanistan, you've served in Iraq, you're a flight surgeon. Can you talk about just your experience overseas as an actual flight surgeon, just what you learned from that? And then I do want to talk about you being a sharpshooter. I mean, you are working to be a part of the President's 100, which is pretty badass. So first talk about your experience as a flight surgeon and then how it even led to you, on a regular basis shooting.
So there's a lot to talk about there. I joined I've always had a little bit of a draw to the military, even when I was younger, playing with G.I. Joes and everything like that. But we grew up near Fort Knox, and when I finished high school, I considered joining the military at that time and decided to just go to the local college and take the academic route. There was a lot of, I was under the impression of a lot of different kind of misinformation, and so I didn't have all the information that available to me. But ultimately, when I finished medical school and joined residency, had a conversation with my brother-in-law at the time, and he said, just talk to a recruiter. There's some really cool things you can do. And so I did. So I contacted a recruiter my first year in residency and ended up joining in 2010, in December 2010. And in 2012, I finished residency. In 2013, I went to Afghanistan. Yeah. Now, I went to Afghanistan. I wasn't a flight surgeon yet, so I went to Afghanistan as what they call a field surgeon. And a surgeon in the Army, like we were talking about, is just a physician. So it goes back to the old time when every doctor was a surgeon. But it's just nomenclature. So I was a field surgeon. I was a general medical doctor out kind of in the field in Afghanistan and taking care of everything from traumas to whatever, earaches. And so did that in 2013. Came back to the States, kind of was in a regular medical reserve unit for a little while. And then one of my buddies I went to school with was a pilot, and they were looking for a flight surgeon and happened to have some availability there in a unit near my town. So I joined them, went to the flight surgeon course. And that was one of the things that was really impactful on me from this whole longevity and performance thing. One of the things I'm really interested in is sports performance and physical performance. And our main job as a flight surgeon, it's really aerospace medicine or aviation medicine. And what they kind of taught us was, one, sleep and sleep quality was really important, but how important your health is on your actual physical and cognitive performance. And we never really talked about that very much. We may have glossed over it during, the regular training, but most of traditional medicine is focused on treating disease and kind of putting out fires in people that are acutely ill, right? It's not focused on, optimizing health for performance. And so when I went to the flight surgeon course, that was a completely different way to look at medicine for me and a different way to look at health. And so that got me interested, just kind of got the wheels turning a little bit. And then, deployed in 2019 as a flight surgeon as well with 244th ECAB. And so when I got back from that, 2018 is when I kind of decided to start doing the longevity thing and the performance and everything like that. 2019, I got deployed. And then finally, I just decided to kind of take it forward. Now, you asked about the marksmanship. That was kind of happening at the same time as well. I was working a very stressful job in the hospital. Yeah. And one of the things I knew that I needed to do was, we didn't talk about the fourth pillar, and that's mental health or stress management. I knew I needed to do something about that. And so, getting outdoors has always been a very special thing for me. And I wanted to get back outdoors and start hunting and shooting and things like that. And so I knew that I hadn't shot in a while and I wanted to get better at it. So I started training in marksmanship. Well, fast forward, I got involved with competitive marksmanship and started doing pretty well in that and got picked up by the Army Reserve team. And now I'm the officer in charge of the Army Reserve competitive marksmanship service rifle team.
Yeah.
And so we go out and we compete nationally, and we compete with other services, the Army Marksmanship Unit and the Navy and the Guard and the Marine Corps team, as well as professional civilian shooters and amateur civilian shooters. So we train and shoot specifically. We shoot 200, 300, and 600 yards and at static targets and basically high precision marksmanship. So the President's 100
describe what it is.
So the President's 100 is kind of the culminating event. There's two really, really big, in the national matches every year, there's two really big individual matches. So there's the NTI, which is the National Trophy Individual Match, and then there's the President's 100. The President's 100 is only held once a year. It's 30 shots, 10 shots standing at 200 yards, 10 shots prone at 300 yards with a magazine change, and you have 60 seconds starting from standing. And then 10 shots prone from 600 yards with an AR-15. These are all shot with an AR-style rifle or military-style rifle. So 10 shots at 600 yards with a .223 caliber military-style rifle.
A .223, because I own multiple .223 rifles. Mm-hmm. At 600 yards, how does that work?
Well, it's a long shot, but these are accurized.
Is it like a scope because you're aiming higher?
So in 2016, they started allowing a 4.5 power scope. So we used to shoot these all with iron sights, and people were shooting very, very high scores with iron sights. The iron sights on an AR-15 or on an M16 are actually very accurate.
Yeah.
But adding a 4.5 power scope definitely improves that a little bit.
Yeah.
But a 4.5 power scope is not a massive increase, but it does help a little bit. So we do use a 4.5 power scope, but it is still an AR style, gas operated rifle. So it's not like shooting a bolt gun with a.
So when's your next chance to get a part of the President's 100?
So the President's 100, I've shot in it I think 5 or 6 times, and there's you have one shot, you have one chance basically. If you mess anything up, the problem is I tend to mess up a little bit more at 300 yards because 300 yards. You don't get any, it's like you shoot all your shots and then they bring the target down and mark them and come back up. So if you missed your wind call or if you dialed the wrong way, I've done all the things that you can do to mess up at 300 yards, but that's it. Like that's your chance for once a year, and then you got to wait till next year. And then one year I had a baby, or my wife was having a baby, so I missed for deployment 1 year. So I'm hoping, we'll have another shot this year. Most of the guys on the team obviously have made it. And the top 100 shooters are considered the President's 100, the top 100 scores. And most of those are really bunched. Those scores are a lot of them are, each place is separated by X counts typically. So the X count is what kind of makes you place differently.
Okay, so once you get that list and you make it, we're gonna bring you back on the show to talk about the experience. Yes. So I want people that are listening, that are looking to get a longevity doctor, which I highly suggest, and I've been looking at my health, and what's all this matter if we can't live longer, live better lives? Where can people find you to hire you or to follow you on social media? So
drdavidyerkes.com, DrDavidYerkes.com, drdavidyerkes.com. And then my social is all just Dr. David Yerkes. If you look me up, it's all the same picture. So
yeah, well, I want to acknowledge you. Thank you for all you've done. Thank you for your service. Thank you for helping me live a healthier, happier lifestyle. And who knows, maybe I'll live to 120, 150. We'll see.
Absolutely.
And for all of you listening, thank you for tuning in. And as always, until next time, here's to your success.